Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
What I'm about to tell you happened more than 45 years ago, back when my family managed to handle everything on our own, though it was one of the most terrifying moments I can remember. Recently, I saw something on the news that felt disturbingly similar, and it brought all of this back to me, which is why I'm telling it again now. I've shared it a few times over the years, even though it didn't happen directly to me, or rather, I was there when it happened. But I wasn't the one it happened to. I'll explain. At the time, we were living in West Virginia, and back then, there were areas, more than there are now, where people lived in extreme isolation, sometimes in pretty miserable conditions. Those places still exist, but they were far more common then. People didn't have access to much, information was limited, and a lot of them didn't even know how to get out of the situation they were in. It was like a trap of poverty. Today, those situations still exist in different forms, but back then, things were harsher, more raw. I was lucky enough to grow up in a family that had resources. We weren't struggling, not even close. We had vacations, toys, everything a kid could ask for. I had 4 siblings, which today would already be considered a big family, but back then, it wasn't that unusual. On top of that, I had around 11 cousins, so when we all got together, it felt like chaos in the best possible way. One of my uncles owned a large house by a lake deep in the Appalachian Mountains. The house is still in the family to this day. I'm not going to say exactly where it is, because the last thing we'd want is to draw attention to it. But it's in a very remote area. The place itself is massive, almost like a mansion, right by the water, with multiple bedrooms and the kind of size that requires constant upkeep. Every year, the entire family would gather there for 1 or 2 weeks. We'd go more than once throughout the year, but that particular trip, the one I'm talking about, happened in the spring. It wasn't quite summer yet, but it already felt like it in that part of the country. The weather was warm, the lake looked inviting, and we spent most of our time outside. The younger ones played games, we all swam under strict supervision, especially after one of my cousins had almost drowned there 2 years earlier, which made the adults a lot more cautious. The first 3 or 4 days passed like any other. Looking back, I'm aware that memory isn't perfect. Over the years, details blur. Some things might get distorted. But there are parts of this story that are burned into my mind so clearly that I know they happened exactly the way I remember them. One night, after those first few days, I was sitting by the window in the room I shared with one of my cousins, just staring out at the lake. I always liked doing that, watching the moon reflect off the water. It was quiet, the kind of silence you only get in places far away from everything. At some point, I noticed what looked like a faint reflection of light coming from the tree line right beside the house. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but in that kind of darkness, where the only real source of light was the moon on the lake, even the smallest change stands out. I kept looking, not really thinking much of it at first, until I realized something in that area was moving. It was almost imperceptible, especially with the wind rustling through the trees. But there was a difference. The wind usually moved the tops of the trees, the higher branches. But this was lower, closer to the ground, where there were bushes and undergrowth. And in that dim light, I was almost certain I had seen something shift. I told my cousin there might be some kind of predator near the house. I didn't actually know that, of course, but it felt like the kind of thing we'd say to each other, half serious, half trying to scare one another. We immediately started building a story around it, planning how we'd tell the younger kids the next day and freak them out a little. That was just what we did as the older cousins. I didn't think much more about it after that. I went to bed, and the next morning we told the story, just like we had planned. The problem is, one of my younger cousins, Lucy, had her own story to tell. That night, she had woken up crying and gone to her parents, saying there was a man at her bedroom window. Her parents got up immediately, alarmed, and from what I later understood, some of the adults went outside to check the perimeter of the house. I hadn't noticed any of this happening at the time, but there had been a search, people moving around, trying to see if anyone was out there. My cousin and I didn't mention what we had seen the night before. Suddenly, the idea that it might not have been an animal didn't feel like a joke anymore. At the time, I remember thinking it was strange that her window had been open, especially since her room was on the ground floor. In those areas, you usually keep everything closed at night. But the truth is, because nothing had ever happened there before, because the house felt so remote and hidden, people got comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. They searched the house and the surrounding area and found nothing. No signs, no footprints, nothing to suggest that anyone had actually been there. In the end, they told Lucy it had just been a bad dream and tried to calm her down. The next day went on as usual. We spent time by the lake, played. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing felt wrong. But that night, I went back to the same window. I stood there for a while, maybe 15 minutes, just staring into the darkness, trying to see if I could spot anything again. After a bit, my cousin joined me and asked what that shape was on the opposite side from where I had seen the light the night before. I followed his gaze, and there it was, a shadow. It looked like the outline of a person standing there, partially hidden between the trees. We squinted, trying to make sense of it, thinking it might be one of our uncles. It wouldn't have been unusual for them to step outside for a cigarette. Most of them smoked back then, and sometimes they'd wander a bit while doing it. From where we stood, we couldn't make out any clear features. But every now and then, there was a faint glow, small and brief, like the tip of a cigarette lighting up in the dark. So we assumed that's what it was. We opened the window slightly and waved. Whoever it was waved back. Then the figure turned and walked toward the lake, disappearing into the trees. Once again, we just assumed it had to be one of our uncles, someone who had stepped outside for a cigarette and decided to take a short walk near the trees. I know that now it might sound strange, and maybe if I had been older, I would have questioned it more, especially knowing what happened afterward. But the truth is we were 12 years old, in a place we believed was completely safe, so the idea of real danger never fully crossed our minds. It also wasn't unusual. Some of our uncles, and even a couple of our aunts, would go outside at night. Two of my aunts, in particular, were a bit rebellious for that time, especially considering how society treated women back then, and they were actually some of my favorites. They smoked, they walked around at night, they didn't really follow the rules people expected them to follow. So, in our heads, it made perfect sense that it could have been one of them, even if, from what we saw, it looked more like a man. So we ignored it, went back to bed, and figured we'd just ask at breakfast who had waved back at us. But that's when things started to shift. The next morning we asked casually, expecting someone to laugh and admit it. But no one did. None of our uncles, none of our aunts. No one had been outside in that area at that time. And suddenly, there were two separate things that didn't line up anymore. We had seen someone near the house, and Lucy, even if she was young, had said there was a man at her window. You could feel the tension at the table change. It wasn't dramatic, no one panicked, but there was a subtle shift, like something unspoken had just settled in the room. For the first time, it felt like maybe we weren't as alone out there as we had always believed. That night, everything was different. All the windows were shut and locked. Every door checked multiple times. Some of my uncles even went up to the attic, the highest point in the house, where you could see all around the property, and they took turns watching, scanning the tree line, trying to catch any movement. But they didn't see anything. After that, a few days passed, maybe 2 or 3, and nothing else happened. No shadows, no lights, and no signs of anyone. Slowly, people began to relax again. The explanation that made the most sense was that it had been someone passing through. After all, even if the house itself sat on private property, the surrounding forest didn't belong to us. And it wasn't impossible for hikers or strangers to wander through, spot the house, get curious, maybe linger a bit. So, eventually, things went back to normal. About a week after we had arrived, we were all outside playing hide and seek in the forest, both the younger kids and the older ones. There were rules, of course. We weren't allowed to play after dark, and we weren't supposed to go too far beyond the perimeter of the house. The younger kids followed those rules, but the older ones, like me, sometimes bent them a little. We knew better hiding spots, places slightly farther out, spots that gave us an advantage. I had one in particular, a small recess between some rocks, far enough that it technically broke the rules, but still close enough that I could see the house through the trees if the lights were on, and I could hear voices, hear my cousin counting as he got ready to come find us. I had been there maybe 2 minutes when I heard something to my right, a sharp and sudden noise. Before I could even process it, I saw him. It was a man moving through the trees, passing incredibly close to where I was hiding. I froze. I remember letting out a small breath, barely more than a whisper. But it was enough. He stopped immediately and looked around. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought he would hear it. I knew that from where I was, he couldn't see me unless he got lower, unless he crouched or stepped closer. I covered my mouth with my hand and stayed completely still. It's hard to explain why that moment felt the way it did, but being there, hidden, alone, knowing that this was the same presence we had noticed before, it was one of the most terrifying things I had ever experienced. After a few seconds, maybe longer, he kept moving. The second I felt safe enough, I got out of that spot and ran. I ran as fast as I could back toward the house, shouting before I even reached it, yelling that the game was over, that this wasn't a joke, that everyone needed to get back inside immediately. They heard it in my voice, and one by one, my cousins and siblings started coming out of their hiding places. My older brother, who was 15 at the time, the only one older than me, grabbed me and asked what was going on. When I told him, he didn't hesitate. He ran to get our parents. Within minutes, everyone was being called inside. Adults were shouting names, making sure every child came back. One by one, we all made it in. Except Lucy didn't. At first, it was just confusion. Then it turned into panic. My aunt and uncle started screaming her name, their voices breaking in a way I had never heard before. We, the kids, were told to stay inside, my older brother watching over us, while all the adults ran back out into the forest. Hours passed. I don't remember how many, but I remember the feeling, the waiting, the silence inside the house, broken only by occasional shouting from outside. My parents talked about calling the police, but back then, in a place that remote, it would take a long time for them to arrive. My uncles believed they could cover more ground themselves at first, that they could find her faster. They searched through the night. They didn't stop. It took about a day and a half before they finally called the police. Once the police got involved, the search expanded. But even then, nothing. No sign of her, no clues, and nothing to suggest where she had gone. 5 days passed like that. Then my Aunt Joanne was walking past one of the storage areas attached to the house, and she found her. Lucy was inside, tied up and barely conscious. She had been there the entire time. None of us had even thought to look there. It was too obvious, too close. No one expected that whoever had taken her would hide her inside the property itself, that close to the house, with so many adults around, some of them armed. It felt impossible, but it had happened. She was rushed to the hospital. They ran tests, and thankfully, she hadn't been physically harmed, but there were clear signs in her system that she had been drugged. The police searched everything, the house, the land, and the surrounding forest, but they never found anyone. Obviously, we didn't go back to that house for years after that. Over time, Lucy started remembering small pieces. Not everything, but enough. She remembered his face, said he had a lot of facial hair. She said that at first, he had been kind, that he told her he was a friend of her father, that he knew a really good hiding spot. She was 5 years old. She didn't know what real danger looked like. So she went with him. We never figured out what his actual goal was. If he had truly wanted to kidnap her, he could have taken her with him. He had more than enough opportunities to do it. If he only meant to scare us, then it raises an even darker question. Because what kind of person drugs a child just to make a point or to get some twisted sense of satisfaction out of it? There were whispers over the years, quiet conversations between the adults that we weren't supposed to hear, suggesting it might have been some kind of personal grudge, maybe directed at Lucy's father, who, despite being family and someone I cared about, was known to have made enemies in that area. But even that never turned into anything concrete, just theories that never led anywhere. The truth is, we were left without answers, and sometimes that's worse than knowing. Not understanding why something like that happened, not knowing who was capable of it, it stays with you in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived through it. It changed all of us. Lucy was never the same again. She became quiet, withdrawn, The kind of child who would hesitate before trusting anyone, even people she had known her entire life. As for the rest of us, that sense of safety we once had, running freely around that house, hiding in the woods without a second thought, it was gone overnight. For years, none of us wanted to go back there. That house, which used to feel like the center of our childhood, full of noise and laughter, suddenly felt exposed, like something could be watching you from the trees at any moment. A few of us did return eventually, older, trying to convince ourselves it had all been a one-time thing, something that couldn't possibly happen again. But it was never the same. We slept lightly, every small noise pulling us awake, every window locked, every door checked more than once before going to bed. No one wandered far from the house anymore, not even during the day. And even now, after all these years, we still don't have an explanation. No suspect, no clear motive, nothing that ties it all together in a way that makes sense. The only thing we can hold on to is that, somehow, it ended without something even worse happening. Because whatever that man intended to do, whatever was going through his head, it could have gone so much further. And that thought alone is enough to make it stay with you for the rest of your life. Hi, my name is Matt, and ever since I can remember, one of the things I wanted most when I grew up was to become a biologist. Specifically someone who studies the kind of flora you only find deep in the Appalachian Mountains. I'm originally from West Virginia. I grew up surrounded by those mountains. Even though these days I live in Pennsylvania, still working within the same range, still studying its wildlife and plant life, because there are parts of those mountains that remain barely documented, where sometimes there isn't even a clear scientific explanation for why something grows where it does. And those are the places that have always fascinated me the most. I've always felt comfortable in the mountains, more than comfortable actually. I'd say I respect them more than I fear them. Because if you grow up there, you learn very quickly that most of the bad things that happen aren't about bad luck. They're about people being careless, about not planning properly, about underestimating the environment. I've never been that kind of person. I'm organized, methodical, I plan my trips carefully, I bring what I need, I don't take unnecessary risks, and because of that, I've never really had a situation where I felt truly in danger. Until recently. What happened to me wasn't something I expected at all. It wasn't the mountains turning on me or some kind of natural hazard. It was something else entirely. And looking back, I can see the exact moment where I let my guard down, even if just a little, and how that could have ended a lot worse than it did. About 3 years ago, I came across a plant species in the Appalachians that isn't well documented at all, something that produces a very unusual kind of fruit, and has been quietly gaining attention because of its potential medicinal properties. Since then, a big part of my work has been focused on studying it, understanding how it grows, how it spreads, what kind of conditions it thrives in, and more importantly, why it exists in the specific locations where we found it. That means a lot of field work, a lot of time spent deep in the mountains, mapping patterns, collecting samples, trying to build something that resembles an explanation. Around 3 months ago, I was assigned a new assistant for the research program I'm part of. Normally, that's a great thing. Most assistants come in eager to learn, motivated, curious, and honestly, it helps a lot with the workload, because this field isn't exactly well paid, and there's a lot more work than people realize, especially with how often science gets dismissed or misunderstood. Over the years, I've worked with several assistants, and I still keep in touch with most of them. They've all been great people. But this one was different. From the very beginning, something about him felt off. He was actually a year older than me. He had just taken a different path and started college later, which wasn't an issue in itself, but there were small things, patterns in his behavior, that started to stand out the more I paid attention. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just little moments where something would go wrong for someone else, and he seemed to enjoy it a bit too much. Or the way he reacted to things that most people would find uncomfortable. There was one time on campus when we came across a dead frog. Nothing unusual. It happens. But the way he joked about it wasn't normal. It wasn't just dark humor. It felt like there was something behind it, something that didn't sit right with me. And I know people use humor to deal with discomfort. I've done it myself, but this felt different. There was a certain weight to it, a kind of negativity that followed him around. I'm not the kind of person who judges others quickly. I usually give people the benefit of the doubt, but I'll be honest. There have only been 2 other times in my life where I got that same feeling from someone. And both of those times, I ended up being right to be cautious. Still, he was my assistant, and I had a job to do. So I pushed those thoughts aside and kept things professional. About 3 weeks ago, we were scheduled for a field trip. Just the 2 of us and another colleague from the program who had more experience than both of us combined. The plan was simple. A 2.5-day trip to collect samples and document a specific area where the plant had been spotted before. But a couple of days before we left, our colleague had to cancel because her kid got sick. And since we had already prepared everything, we decided to go ahead with just the 2 of us, keep it simple, get what we needed, and come back. The location itself is something I can't disclose, partly because the research is still ongoing, and partly because places like that can get destroyed if too many people find out about them. Unfortunately, it's happened before. People either vandalize the area or strip it of anything valuable without understanding what they're doing. So, we're required to keep those details confidential. What I can say is that it was remote. No trails nearby. About a 4-hour hike from the nearest accessible point where the team dropped us off. We started early, and I'll give him this. He was fast, faster than I expected, and we made good time getting to the area where we planned to set up camp for the night before heading deeper the next day. We arrived with about an hour of daylight left, which was perfect. Enough time to organize our gear, set up camp, and get some rest before continuing. It was only when I started unpacking that I noticed something was wrong. My first aid kit was missing. That's where everything really started to shift for me. I felt a sharp wave of unease almost immediately. Because this wasn't something clipped to the outside of my pack or hanging loose where it could have fallen off without me noticing. It had been inside my backpack the entire time, stored carefully where I always keep it. I ran through the day in my head, every stop we had made, every moment I had taken the pack off. and there wasn't a single instance where I could remember opening that compartment or leaving my things unattended. For a moment, I questioned myself, wondering if I had somehow forgotten to pack it at all, even though that didn't make sense given how methodical I am with this kind of preparation. Still, I asked him if he had seen a small first aid pouch, trying to keep my tone casual. He answered almost too quickly, saying no, that he hadn't seen anything, but added that it was fine because he had one of his own if we needed it. That should have reassured me, yet it did the opposite. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right, almost as if the response had been prepared, like he had anticipated the question. Based on everything I had observed about him over the past few months, it would have made more sense for him to lean into the problem, to highlight the risk, to let the discomfort linger. Instead, he smoothed it over too easily. And that contradiction was enough to set off a quiet alarm in my head. I know that without you knowing either of us, what I'm saying might sound exaggerated, but trust me, I've spent the last 3 months practically locked in a lab with him. I recognize his behavior patterns by now. I know he enjoys seeing people scared, seeing them uncomfortable. He would never say something to reassure me that everything was fine. And that was his first mistake. I asked him directly if he had gone through my pack at any point. He gave me a flat no, followed by that same dismissive look I had seen him give others, though this time it was directed at me, and I let it go. I told myself I might be reading too much into it, that maybe I had made a mistake, even if that didn't feel true. We moved on with setting up camp, dividing the tasks like we always did, keeping things efficient, routine, controlled. As night settled in and the light dropped off, he suddenly mentioned he was going for a walk. That alone made me uneasy. We weren't there for leisure. We were there to work, and wandering off in the dark in a remote area introduced risks we didn't need. I told him no, not directly as an order, but firmly enough that it should have been clear. He looked at me again with that same expression, then said he was just going to the bathroom and stepped off into the trees. 10 minutes passed. I stayed where I was, telling myself there was no reason to escalate things, that he might actually just be taking his time. But the silence around me grew heavier with every second. At some point, I realized I couldn't hear him anymore. No footsteps, no movement, nothing at all. I've always had a good ear for sound. Years of music training will do that to you. And what unsettled me wasn't what I heard. It was what I didn't. It felt like he hadn't left the area at all, like he had simply stopped moving and was somewhere just beyond the trees, watching me. Sometime around 3 in the morning, while I was lying there fully awake, I heard the zipper of his tent slide open. I stayed still, listening as his footsteps circled mine, slow and deliberate. Not the kind of movement you make when you're half asleep or stepping out for something normal. My entire body tensed as I heard him stop right outside my tent. Then I felt the faint pressure of a hand against the fabric, followed by the sound of my zipper beginning to move. I said his name immediately and asked if he needed something. The movement stopped at once. The zipper went still, and I heard him pull his hand away like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't have been doing. He answered that he had heard footsteps and just wanted to check if I was okay. Nothing about that made sense. He wasn't the kind of person who checked on others, not even remotely. And the idea that he had come to make sure I was safe felt completely out of character. That was the moment it became clear to me that something was seriously wrong, and that staying there any longer wasn't an option. I decided right then that we were leaving in the morning. I reached for my satellite phone, intending to call the team and have them pick us up early. But when I opened my pack, it wasn't there. At that point, there was no more doubt. I knew I had brought it. I had seen it that morning before we left, placed exactly where it should be. Now it was gone, just like the first aid kit. Both items critical. Both taken from inside my pack without any explanation. I didn't confront him. I didn't show that I had realized what was happening. Whatever this was, I had the strong sense that reacting the wrong way could make it worse. So I kept my voice steady, told him everything was fine, and suggested we get some rest. But I didn't sleep at all. Instead, I stayed as quiet as possible, going through my gear piece by piece, checking what else might be missing. But aside from those two items, everything else was still there. It wasn't random, it was targeted. At first light, I woke him up and told him we were heading back. I made up an excuse, said I wasn't feeling well, that something I had eaten might have been off. He didn't argue, but there was something in his reaction that stood out, not frustration about the work, but something closer to disappointment, like something had been cut short before it could play out. As we made our way back through the forest, I had to remind him multiple times to use his satellite phone to contact the team and let them know we were returning early. He kept delaying, offering weak excuses, until I finally told him plainly that if he didn't make the call, I would take the phone and do it myself. That was the first time I saw him hesitate, really hesitate, before finally agreeing. The rest of the hike was quiet in a way that felt anything but peaceful. I kept checking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that I needed to stay aware at all times, while he walked behind or beside me, his attention lingering on me in a way that made my skin crawl. We made it back without incident. That same week, I requested a new assistant. I kept it professional, said it was a matter of incompatibility, nothing more, because I knew how it would sound if I tried to explain what I had felt out there. Most people would probably say I was overreacting, that there's no proof anything would have happened. But I know what I felt in that forest, and I know what it means when essential gear starts disappearing without explanation. When someone acts just slightly outside of what you can rationalize. I listened to my instincts, and I got out of there. I'm convinced that if I hadn't, something very, very wrong would have happened out there.